Hello, 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 everyone. How you doing tonight? It's Monday evening. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. We've got a few things to talk about. Um, I do these lives when I've got something to say. And so when I don't have something to say, I do not do these lives. Tonight, I do have something to say. So I've got a few things to say. After I say them, then at that point, we'll do the super chats and then we'll be done. We'll do our roll call, of course, give everyone their shout out. So, folks, if you haven't already done it, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure, let me emphasize, be absolutely, positively sure to hit the subscribe button. Let me re-emphasize, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because lately people have been getting unsubscribed. So be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you are subscribed, be sure to hit the notifications bell so you get notified every time we do one of these. And, be sure to tweet this out, share this with friends, make this a bigger community. The more people here, the happier we are. It's Monday night. I've got plenty of unnamed orange beverage. Folks, I'm glad you're with us here tonight. Folks, I want to let you know, the next live I will be doing, the next one, will be for patrons only. It'll be only for the people signed up on Patreon. Every month I will do one of these. So a number of people have already signed up on Patreon. Eugene Debs writing in. Number of people have already signed up on Patreon. Those people, they put up some money, so they ought to get what they asked for, Axis of Resistance. So the next live I do will be available to Patreon supporters only. So if you want to support us on Patreon, just go down below. I'm going to do plenty of these. Thanks, Mike. I will do plenty of lives, but there will be some exclusive lives where I will give exclusive attention to Patreon supporters. So keep that in mind. If you want to be included in these exclusive lives, you can just sign up below for Patreon. Other than that, I've got a number of things I want to touch on. I'm going to touch on quickly on Kamala Harris. I'm going to talk about the RCP and Bob Avakian basically calling on their supporters to vote for Joe Biden. I'm sure people want to hear all about that. That's the latest leftist socialist gossip. And then from there, we're going to jump into a bigger point that we can learn from that. At the end of the day, the RCP and Bob Avakian are not really that important, but there's an important fact buried in that, and I will get to that. So that'll be my opening remarks for tonight. So quickly on Kamala Harris. Folks, Kamala Harris is not a foregone conclusion. Right? Politico leaked, supposedly, that she was going to be the candidate. She's been appearing on every talk show, making her rounds. They're saying she's the most likely. Every article is saying she's the presumptive vice presidential nominee. If that were actually true, it would not be necessary to write about it that way. Now, would it? I'm just telling you, folks, I have a feeling that there are a lot of powerful forces that want Joe Biden to pick Kamala Harris. And the reason that we're seeing everywhere it being announced as if Joe Biden has already done it is because he has not already done it. Folks, we found out, it was revealed that Hillary Clinton's top backers were all throwing their money behind Kamala Harris. And she was the front runner. She was on the debate stage. And then Tulsi Gabbard took her down. And she didn't recover from that. And the voters saw her for what she is, a prosecutor, a person with no moral compass, a sadistic narcissist. I dug into her background and made a very powerful video about her. And because of that, the American people didn't vote for her. Joe Biden ended up being the nominee. Now, Joe Biden, you'll recall, was called a racist by Kamala during the debates. The famous "that little girl was me" moment, where basically Kamala Harris called Joe Biden a racist because of his previous positions on busing. So it's very doubtful that Joe Biden is going to want to pick Kamala Harris. Number one, Joe Biden's got an ego. Number two, it's going to be kind of hard to explain, Kamala Harris on the campaign trail campaigning for somebody that she accused of being a racist. Now, we still there? Very good. I would say it's very, very unlikely that Kamala Harris will be the nominee at this point. I actually think the establishment forces that are behind her are very, very, very powerful. And they are doing everything they can to just kind of announce that it is a foregone conclusion so that Joe Biden is kind of forced to go along with it. And they wouldn't be doing that. They wouldn't be beating the drum that Kamala Harris is the presumptive nominee if that were the case. So, folks, if you realize, like I do, how dangerous Kamala Harris is, if you realize that, if you realize how much she has basically been selected for her lack of moral compass, etc., take a look at my video. Spread my video around, please. The last super chat I saw was about libertarians and the gold standard. Was there another one? Someone's saying, did I see the last one? Was there another chat that I missed? If there's another chat. But I'm telling you, I don't think that Kamala Harris is necessarily the nominee. In fact, the fact that they're beating the drum so loudly for her probably confirms that she's not the nominee. And this is the crunch time. I mean, there are 11 people still in the running. He's doing a final interview with all of them. I have a feeling Kamala Harris is not the nominee, is not the VP nominee. It's going to be down to the wire. But who knows, right? I mean, share that video about Kamala Harris. Get the word out about how dangerous she really is. That's my opinion. Now, folks, I'm sure those of you that are part of the little socialist, Marxist, leftist milieu, I'm sure that you're all wondering what I have to say about the fact that the RCP, which stands for Revolutionary Communist Party, that its leader, Bob Avakian, sent out an email to everybody in the world today, practically. I mean, the Washington Times, every Republican website, and urging people to vote for Joe Biden. Now, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it does actually make sense. So who are the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP? Well, the RCP, they are a communist group in the United States. And, they are the group that has done the most to kind of market themselves as the communists. They used to march around with red flags. They used to march around with pictures of Mao. They had a chain of bookstores. They still have a few bookstores left, not many, but they used to have a lot more bookstores. They had a chain of bookstores, and they were very, very in your face about being communists. They were a Maoist group. They were formed in 1975. It was the Revolutionary Union was their precursor. Their leader is a guy from the Bay Area who is an Armenian American whose father was a prominent judge who was on the California State Supreme Court. He was active in Berkeley politics, Berkeley activism in the 60s, and was involved with kind of Students for a Democratic Society and all of that. And, throughout the 70s, he was trying to form a communist group here and trying to form a communist group there and kind of absorbing all the different Maoist collectives. And in 1975, they formed the Revolutionary Communist Party. 1976, Mao Zedong died, and that led to a big division within the group. And at first, the division was about whether or not they would still continue to support China, but the difference started to be about a lot more than that. The difference was about would they go organize in communities? Would they try to organize working class economic fight back moves? Would they try to build a labor movement? Or would they simply become kind of an agitational group that advocated revolution? The folks who continued to support China and wanted to build kind of a mass communist group that organized around economic issues were kicked out of the Revolutionary Communist Party. They were called the Revolutionary Worker Headquarters. They eventually merged into the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And the Revolutionary Communist Party in about 1978-79 became basically Bob Avakian's fanatical core of supporters. When Deng Xiaoping came to the United States in 1979. A rally of several hundred people was organized by the Revolutionary Communist Party called Death to Deng Xiaoping, in which hundreds of members of the Revolutionary Communist Party protested at the White House, and there was a lot of arrests and a lot of confrontations, a lot of bloodshed. Right, Bill Clinton, Kwame Ture. Avakian was facing heavy criminal charges after that. He did kind of a speaking tour around the country. He was on TV as kind of the caricature of a scary communist. And during the Iran hostage crisis of 1979, they made a point. There were all these anti-Iran rallies that were going on across the United States where, Americans were burning the Iranian flag and cursing the Ayatollahs and such. The RCP made a point of going to those rallies, lighting American flags on fire, saying it's not our effing embassy, and getting beaten up and punched and, beaten up by right-wingers. They would, and in about 1982, after the charges against him were dropped, Bob Avakian fled to France and was calling himself a political exile, and was living in France for many decades. And the group, throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, are basically, they were the very, very in-your-face communists. They were burning the American flag. They actually took burning the American flag to the Supreme Court. A member of the Revolutionary Communist Party named Joey Johnson, Gregory Johnson, USAROC, KMT, post-World War II. All right. KMT, post. Gregory Johnson, he burned the American flag at the Republican convention in 1984, and he was sentenced to like a year in jail for it. It took it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled in Johnson versus Texas that he did have the right to burn the American flag, a very famous case. That's the RCP. In the 90s, they had an anti-police brutality, anti-racist group called Refuse and Resist. It was promoted by the rock band Rage Against the Machine. Tom Morello was kind of associated with Refuse and Resist. They marched for Mumia Abu-Jamal. So what you have to remember about the RCP, and they are kind of like everyone's favorite socialist communist group to gossip about. Everyone loves to gossip about the RCP. There are a million of these little tiny communist cults that are left over from the 70s. They're all led by one white male. This white male always has a white savior complex, believes he is the savior of black people. They always insist that their group is the one true party, and every other group is just a phony, bourgeois, revisionist scam. There's nothing really particularly original about the RCP. The reason people like to gossip about the RCP, every time Bob Avakian so much as farts, everyone on the left loves to talk about it. The reason for that is because they are very in your face. The RCP, they swear a lot. They use the F word excessively. They yell into bullhorns. They're known for using profane rhetoric. And they're very, very visible. People have talked about how for a lot of people that are getting into communism, they're like the gateway drug because they're the first group you see. The RCP is the first group that, they tend to get most of the media attention, for example, and they're the group that most people who get into communism encounter first. People see them as very, very ultra-left. Most of the young people who come around them stay around for a year or two. That's it. There's a core of fanatical members who've been with them since the beginning. But beside from them, most people join for a year or two, and it just gets too over the top, and they leave. They're a very fanatical group, and they're very good at being visible and selling their newspaper and screaming and yelling, and That's the RCP. And the thing is, people are all in shock now that the RCP sent out an email today telling people to vote for Joe Biden, right? Bob Avakian wrote this big, long manifesto in which she announced to vote for Joe Biden. Well, here's the thing, folks. The RCP has been trying this game, I guess you could say, since the 70s. Before they were the RCP, when they were the Revolutionary Union, Richard Nixon was the president. And there was the Watergate scandal. So the RCP formed this group called the Workers' Committee to Throw the Bum Out. And they had protests calling for Richard Nixon to be impeached. And it was called the Workers' Committee to Throw the Bum Out. And it was rallies calling for Nixon to be impeached. And what was pretty weird about that was that China was negotiating with Nixon. China liked Nixon. And the RCP was supposed to be a Maoist group that was aligned with China. But they had big rallies calling for Nixon's impeachment when China felt that Nixon was a good guy they could negotiate with. And that pointed to the fact that there were two big pro-China communist groups in the United States at that point. I mean, there were a lot more, but the two major ones were the Revolutionary Communist Party, Revolutionary Union, and the October League. And the October League agreed with China's foreign policy, and the RCP did not. All right, the Revolutionary Union, the Revolutionary Communist Party didn't agree with China's foreign policy. The October League did. And that China's foreign policy in that time, in the 70s, China's foreign policy was pretty weird. China supported Pinochet. China supported the CIA in Angola and was working against the socialist MPLA government. China cut all ties with Cuba and said that Cuba was capitalist and a revisionist country. China said that the Soviet Union were the main danger to humanity and the main danger, and that the U.S. imperialists were nowhere near as dangerous as the Soviet social imperialists. And it was very weird if you were a leftist or a Marxist activist in the United States to be supporting Chinese foreign policy because it didn't line up with being an anti-Vietnam War protester. But the RCP didn't really support Chinese foreign policy. They still liked China. The October League did. But it was weird. The RCP had this rally. And again, they referred to Richard Nixon as a fascist. And they were going to organize this workers' committee to throw the bum out. Fast forward to the 1980s. In the 1980s, the Revolutionary Communist Party announced that Ronald Reagan was a fascist. And not only was Ronald Reagan a fascist, but he was going to lead to create nuclear war. That was the allegation. They published a book, A Horrible End or An End to Horror, in which they argued that Ronald Reagan was the American Hitler, the USA was moving toward fascism, and Ronald Reagan was going to launch a nuclear war. And there would be a nuclear war between the USA and the Soviet Union unless the fascist Reagan regime was driven out. And they actually organized a national day of protest called No Business as Usual. It was a day of action against nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants. And it was the RCP, and, you know, it kind of worked. The symbol that they picked for their no business as usual was, at the time, in the 80s, it was very popular. There was the smiley face, the yellow smiley face. So they did a yellow smiley face with a frown face, and it said no business as usual. I believe they had a chant, "We must do all we can to stop World War III. We must do all we can to stop World War III. It was the same idea. We're moving toward fascism. Republicans are fascists. This is just like being in Hitler's Germany, and we're on the road to Nazism. We're going to lead protests. We must do everything we can. Republicans are fascists. The end of the world is coming. Only communist revolution is the answer. That was kind of their approach, but, anything to drive out the Reagan regime. Well, fast forward to the Bush years. I remember very, very, very well, because that was when I was getting politically active. George W. Bush was the president, and the RCP formed The World Can't Wait, Drive Out the Bush Regime. And it was a mass movement to drive George W. Bush from office. And again, George W. Bush was a fascist. The USA is on the road toward fascism. The war in Iraq, the crackdown on civil liberties, nuclear weapons, mushroom clouds. We're all going to die. Guantanamo Bay. And that was the RCP line. The RCP line was, unless Bush is driven out of office, we're going to be on the road to fascism. I remember in 2004, after the 2004 election, the RCP said something to the effect of, this might be the last election in U.S. history. It wasn't. I remember these protests, and they really had you believing that if George W. Bush were not driven from office, that the end of the world was coming. I remember they even had slogans like, there are only two ways forward for humanity, the way of George Bush or the way of Bob Avakian. And it was silly, right? But throughout all of this, from Nixon to Reagan to the Bush regime, they never called on their members to vote. The RCP had this weird position that voting was counter-revolutionary. If you went and voted, you were acknowledging the right of the ruling class to rule over you. Never did they believe in voting. They were trying to recruit, and they did this, and they would take out ads in the New York Times. For example, that was one thing that they did, was they would take out ads in the New York Times, and they would get a lot of liberal celebrities to sign money on these ads. And they would raise a lot of money, not as the Revolutionary Communist Party, but as the world can't wait, no business as usual, workers committed to throw the bum out. And it was their way of kind of, having a periphery, right? Very few people in the United States are going to agree with Maoist communist revolution, especially during the times I'm describing. But if you're part of a mass movement to drive out, a Republican leader because we're all going to die from nuclear war and fascism, that's a way to get support. It's a united front, which is what communists do. They build united fronts, right? So they're trying to build a united front against Republicans. That's basically what the RCP's been doing. So now, we're now in this weird period, 2020. Trump is the president. And of course, everyone from CNN to George W. Bush, from the head neocon, John Bolton, all of them are saying he's a liberal, that he's a threat to the establishment. All of them are saying that. Right? There's a feeling that Donald Trump is leading us toward Nazis and fascism, writing it down, CPI, and so we have to drive out Donald Trump. We have to get rid of Donald Trump. So the RCP, they're jumping on top of this, right? And they're doing the exact same thing that they did in the Bush years, they did in the Reagan years, and they did in the Nixon years. They're building a united front against Donald Trump. They're beating the alarmist drum. Oh my God, if Donald Trump is not defeated, there'll be nuclear war, there'll be fascism and death camps. This is the biggest threat. They're beating that same drum. They're getting the same crowd of liberals around them. Right. They're playing from the old playbook. Right? That's what they're doing. Folks, we can understand why people might feel that way about Donald Trump. I mean, his immigration policies are horrendous. The things that are going on at the border are horrendous. His response to police brutality, supporting the police, the statements he's made, the sending of federal officers into Portland. Absolutely. I mean, there are, the statements that Donald Trump has made about women, the statements Donald Trump has made about Muslims. There are many things about Donald Trump that would lead one to believe that he's no good. And Donald Trump is no good. I mean, he murdered Qasem Soleimani, and almost got us into a war with Iran. He's been meddling in Venezuela, trying to destabilize it. He's been deregulating the economy, dropping wages. He's basically presiding over in the wake of the pandemic. We've seen the U.S. economy completely crash. He's presiding over that, not taking the necessary action to help working families amid this pandemic. Plenty to hate about Donald Trump. Plenty to hate about Donald Trump. No endorsement to Trump whatsoever. Donald Trump has mismanaged this pandemic. He's got every state doing whatever it feels like on their own. It's a nightmare the way Trump has handled this pandemic. On top of that, he's mismanaging the economy. On top of that, he's got no clue what his foreign policy is. One day he sounds like an isolationist. The next day he sounds like a neocon. He beats his chest to please the Miami Cubans. He beats his chest to please the Iranian Shah supporters in Los Angeles. He doesn't know what he's doing. No support to Donald Trump whatsoever. None. But folks, there's a difference between Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush and Nixon. In fact, George W. Bush is endorsing Joe Biden. Folks, the late Cold War political setup is over. Politics in the U.S. has gotten really darn confusing. We're in a new period. This is not Cold War America. And things are really, really confusing right now. And the RCP, just like most socialist communist activists, cannot wrap their heads around it. They don't understand what's different about George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, and Trump. There are big differences between them. Big differences. And no, the difference is not just that Trump is worse. There's big differences. Big differences here. Folks, the late Cold War, right? The early Cold War. The Cold War starts after World War II, right? World War II happens. After World War II, the USA starts having a Cold War with the Soviet Union. At first, the United States is moving toward a totalitarian state with McCarthyism. They whip the whole population up into this anti-communist hysteria. They're trying to move towards some kind of, authoritarian state. They lock up all the leaders of the Communist Party. They have witch hunts, not just in Hollywood, but, all across the country. If you're a communist, you can't get a job, etc. From there, protest in Germany. From there, McCarthyism continues, and because this is the United States, McCarthyism gets out of control, gets very out of control, and suddenly a bunch of middle-class people are mobilized and whipped up into this McCarthyism and are accusing not communists and not leftist dissidents, but leaders of the government of being communist. Joe McCarthy said the U.S. Army was communist. They called the Methodist Church communist. They called the Rockefeller family communists. And the McCarthyism got so nuts that the ruling class, in order to keep order in the United States, in order to negotiate with the USSR, in order to try and stabilize the country, they couldn't do McCarthyism. So you started to have the rise of Cold War liberalism, right? And the United States, they realized they have a ticking time bomb with African Americans. That, yes, the economy is good post-World War II, but the African American community is suffering. There's huge anger among the black community. Communist groups seem to be the only people that really care about the black community and really want to resist racism. So, the civil rights movement, the rise of Cold War liberalism, the heyday of the Kennedy family comes in, and they're an attempt to push back against McCarthyism. We have the rise of Cold War liberalism with, the peace movement, the early peace movement, the civil rights movement, the Kennedy family. Of course, things escalate. There's a military-industrial complex in the United States that makes profits from war. But there's the CIA and the strategic wing of American intelligence that says, basically, in order to effectively fight the communists, we can't have these huge dramatic wars like in Vietnam and Korea. We need to use soft power and covert means. So the CIA is kind of opposed to the Vietnam War. BLM. That kind of thing. So there's a conflict in the ruling class. The civil rights movement gives birth to eventually the Black Liberation Movement, which becomes pro-communist. Then you have the peace movement eventually gives birth to Students for a Democratic Society and the new communist movement and Maoists. By about the time Richard Nixon takes office, what started out as the ruling class trying to control McCarthyism has gotten so out of control. There's huge rebellions among the black community in major cities. There's huge protests and rebellions among students, college students. Somewhere between 1 and 2 million college students said that they believed in communist revolution in 1969, according to a survey that was taken. You imagine that 1 to 2 million people advocating a communist revolution in the United States. The situation had significantly escalated. So that's when the beginning of what you can call the late Cold War normal came in. After the crisis of 1969, 1970, 1971, that the capitalist class of the United States figured out a formula through which they could keep order during the Cold War, right? You had a booming economy. You had this huge middle class of people in industrial jobs, good paying, this white middle class section of U.S. society that was decently paid and had like a decent living standard. And they didn't like the anti-Vietnam War protesters. They were very afraid of black people. They had a very racist fear of African Americans. They lived in all-white suburbs or all-white rural areas, and they figured out that basically this section of U.S. society, this labor aristocracy, you could call it, this white middle class, could be kind of the rock that held U.S. society together. That's basically what they figured out. Richard Nixon talked about a silent majority. The silent majority, right? Those who aren't heard of, right? And, the good people, right? He's talking against protesters and leftists. He says, these people out here in the streets, they're not romantic revolutionaries. These are the same kinds of common thugs and criminals that have always plagued the good people. And by the good people, he's talking about this white middle class that he likes, right? And that throughout the 70s, up until the 80s, the ruling class of the United States figured out a formula for making U.S. society work. What they figured out was that they could have this core of people that were white and working class, but Republican, conservative, tied with the military, evangelical Christians. They could be the hardliners of America. And if that solid core of U.S. society was intact, the left, the black community, and the socialist left wouldn't be too much of a problem. And that was the formula, right? And that was neoconservatism. There was a hit song that came out around the time Nixon was elected. And it was by Merrill Haggard. It was called Okie from Muskogee. And it was about, we don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. And it was about this little town where no one protests anything and they love the American flag and they don't like protesters and hippies, right? This is the Cold War normal that they figured out amid the crisis of the 60s. They figured out that this layer of this middle American layer was the core that would hold U.S. society together. And the left, they tended to be the African American community, people that were, black nationalist activists, the Black Freedom Struggle, the Black Panthers. You also had, socialist and communist leftists, tended to be people who went to Harvard and Yale, and, wealthier folks, middle class folks, intellectuals, college professors, Hollywood writers, and artists. And there was this milieu of people that joined socialist and communist groups because they were part of this kind of academic, artistic, this milieu of people, right? And I got to tell you, that was one thing, that always blew my mind. It seemed like when I was in these communist groups, there were no, normal people. Everyone, went to Harvard or went to Yale or had a brother who was in Hollywood. It was weird. You didn't find just average American families who just kind of came to the conclusion communism was right. It was like everyone who was a communist was somehow tied in with this kind of bohemian, artistic, elite, wealthier milieu. It was very, very weird. But regardless, right? So communists and socialists, they did their thing. The black nationalist movement, black revolutionaries, they did their thing. But there was this core, this core of people that said, if you don't like it here, why don't you move to some other country, you commie? This is the greatest country in the world. Why don't you move and get out of here if you don't like it? This right-wing milieu, a really nasty kind of, and it was not deep politics. It was just kind of, God bless America, follow the Bible, follow America, communism is evil, this is the greatest country in the world. It was this right-wing milieu. And they were Republicans. Democrats believed basically the same thing the Republicans believed. It was just watered down a little bit, right? They believed in negotiating with the USSR, right? Republicans were spend on the military, escalate the arms race. Democrats were like, let's negotiate with the USSR. Let's negotiate with them, right? Ronald Reagan, tear down that wall. Walter Mondale says, well, I like Mr. Gorbachev. He's a little bit of a reformer. He's not as bad as some of the other ones now. It was this dynamic. And, of course, the communists and the black liberation struggle, even though they hated the Democrats, even though the Democrats basically said the same thing as the Republicans, they tended to either vote for the Democrats or not vote, right? The Communist Party, people that were in more moderate socialist groups would campaign for the Democrats and urge people to support the Democrats as the lesser of two evils. The RCP and Workers' World and groups like that would say, don't vote, be in the streets and protest because voting, isn't the answer, build the movement. And that was how U.S. society was set up. That was the Cold War normal, right? And the Cold War normal was based on the assumption that this core of people, right, white, working class Americans, were hopeless. That's what it's really based on. I mean, that was how it was based on. The Republicans had them. If you were a low-income white person, if you were in the military, if you were an evangelical Christian, if you were living in the suburbs, if you were living in rural America, and you were hopeless. The socialists and communists had no chance of ever recruiting you, ever, right? The only people that socialists and communists could ever recruit were people that were in that kind of academic hippie milieu, maybe on the fringes of the Democratic Party, and people in the black liberation movement. Those were really the only people communists could ever think of recruiting. Everyone, the rest of U.S. society, they loved America, they loved capitalism, and love it or leave it, move to another country if you don't disagree. That solid core that held the Cold War political normal together. It's actually, in a weird way, it kind of mirrors the way a lot of the anti-imperialist and socialist countries are right now, right? You go to Venezuela, there's a solid core of people who support Maduro, right? And they're in the military, they're Chavistas, they live in Chavista neighborhoods and collectivos, and they are with Maduro till the end. And there's people that are kind of on the milieu and China, right? There's a core of people in the military that are loyal to the Communist Party, and then there's a core of people around it that are maybe indifferent. That's basically, Iran, right? They have the hardliners and the moderates. And basically during the Cold War, the Republicans were America's hardliners and the Democrats were America's moderates. Basically, that was the political setup. And it worked. It worked. It worked very effectively. That was the political setup. That is no longer the political setup. That is not how American politics works anymore. It just doesn't work that way anymore. Look at the way things operate now. Right now, Donald Trump is not the hardliner of America. The voices representing the establishment continue to preach that Donald Trump is damaging the country, that Donald Trump represents what they call illiberalism. They accuse Donald Trump of promoting conspiracy theories. They accuse Donald Trump of destroying faith in our democratic institutions. They accuse Donald Trump of destroying our faith in the U.S. media. They say that Donald Trump and his supporters are fanatical, that they think the U.S. elections are rigged. Donald Trump is not an American hardliner. Donald Trump is not George W. Bush. Donald Trump is not Ronald Reagan. Donald Trump is not Richard Nixon. Donald Trump, more than any of those leaders, is opposed by the establishment, and not liberal wings of the establishment. They see Donald Trump as somebody who is, mismanaging and wrecking the U.S. society. They see Donald Trump as somebody who is, not pro-war enough and doesn't seem to have U.S. foreign policy strategy as central to what he believes. He operates in his own self-interest, not in the interest of the country overall. If you read John Bolton's book, Donald Trump is not a hardliner. John Bolton was a Cold War hardliner. He was with Bush, he was with Reagan. George W. Bush comes out of that tradition. Trump is not from that tradition. Trump is a self-serving Bonapartist who's trying to build a mass movement of his supporters so that he can do what he wants. Donald Trump is not a hardliner of the American establishment. Donald Trump is a self-serving politician who is trying to build a mass movement to back him up so he can act like a Bonapartist. Not a good Bonapartist, mind you. His economic policies have been a disaster. I'm not saying he's good, but I'm telling you, the establishment, the hardliners of America, the neocons, don't like Donald Trump. Okay? So the fact that the RCP responds to Donald Trump the same way that they responded to Reagan, the same way they responded to Nixon, the same way they respond, shows they don't understand American politics. They don't understand American politics. They don't understand what has changed. They don't understand that in 2008, the U.S. economy crashed. And that middle class that was the hardliners, the core, that the glue that held U.S. imperialism together, is now more open than ever to hearing a socialist message. They don't understand that polls show overwhelmingly interest in socialism in the United States is through the roof. They don't understand that Americans are economically suffering right now. They don't understand that. They don't understand that. All they understand is that Donald Trump has a mass movement of supporters. He waves American flags. He's racist, which he is. He's anti-immigrant, which he is. He's pro-cop, which he is. But they don't understand that Donald Trump's very existence points to the fact that instead of Trump, we could be spreading socialism, right? That people in middle America are open to hearing a left-wing, anti-establishment message. They are voting for a guy who tells you not to trust mainstream media, who says that, there's a small ruling elite that controls the United States, who says that he fights for the people against the rich and powerful. Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, is saying what socialists say. He's just saying it wrong, right? He's taking basic concepts that socialists have been screaming about for years, and he's diverting them toward his right-wing whatever. But for years, socialists have been telling Americans, mainstream media lies, don't trust it. And they've been going, come on, get you. For years, socialists have been saying, the U.S. wars are about profits and all of that, and Americans have been saying, get your conspiracy theories away from me. Well, Donald Trump is saying all those things. And the only reason that Donald Trump is able to say these things and get mass support from the working class in saying them is because the socialist and leftist movement isn't saying those things. The socialist and leftist movement, even though the U.S. economy has crashed, even though that white middle class is now suffering, even though the society is more integrated than ever, even though there's widespread understanding that a police state is coming down on us and our rights are being taken away, even though people are more opposed to the wars than they've ever been in my lifetime, even though all these things are pointing toward American workers joining arm in arm with the black working class and standing in solidarity against capitalism and imperialism, even though the door is open right now to go to the broad masses of people with a socialist message, even though millions of Americans are waking up, the socialist and communist movement is still operating. They're still singing Okie from Muskogee. They still assume that average people, they're brainwashed, They're still operating on this assumption we can only recruit from this milieu of the fringe of the Democratic Party. And they're not seizing the moment. They don't, you look at the RCP. The RCP, to their credit, they've done great work around police brutality over the years, right? No other group has given as much energy to fighting police brutality as they have, okay? And they've taken a lot of abuse and made a lot of sacrifices. So, but why do they burn the American flag? Why do they burn the American flag? Well, they burn the American flag for the simple reason that they assume that anyone who's going to be offended by them burning the American flag is not recruitable. They're not worried about, if you're the kind of person that sees the burning of the American flag and gets offended, you're not recruitable, right? They understand that most people in the United States, for whatever reason, they see the American flag on fire, they take it as a personal insult. All their life, they've been told that's our flag, that's us, that's our country. So when they see it lit on fire, they take it like someone's telling them to go F themselves. They take it like a slap in the face. The RCP assumes that if that's your reaction to the burning of the American flag, you'll never be a socialist, you'll never be a communist, so what's the point? The RCP is only trying to recruit people that feel alienated from U.S. society. And they see them burning the American flag and say, oh, wow, I'm kind of offended by the American flag too. I've never really fit in with this country. This country is racist and maybe I ought to check this group out. You know, I used to present my politics very, very differently because I operated on the same assumption. I assumed that I would never recruit people all across this country. I assumed that we would never build a mass movement. I was trying to look like the most badass guy in the protest cage, right? I wanted to look like I was the most cool, edgy, revolutionary communist. And so I did things similar to that, right? I would, do things, that would clearly not appeal to a broad audience because I assumed that a broad audience was not recruitable, right? And that's what, when you're in that milieu of people that the RCP is in, that Workers' World Party is in, that the Socialist Workers' Party and the ISO and there's a million, a Spartacist League, and that milieu of people, they're still operating as if American politics is the Cold War normal. And they assume they can only recruit this small milieu of people, and they assume that there's this core of people that the people that are supporting Trump right now could never possibly be convinced of a socialist message. So why even try? So why do anything that would try to appeal to them, right? And based on that, they see Trump as a great threat. They see Donald Trump as a great, great threat. And meanwhile, they also think that the people protesting Donald Trump, that this I don't know what you want to call them, the woke crowd, they think that is where the revolution is going to come from. And there are great people in the woke crowd. Don't get me wrong. Okay, there's great people in the woke crowd protesting police brutality, but a lot of the folks in the woke crowd, I'll tell you, they hate middle America, right? Middle America is, they're all just a bunch of racist, sexist, colonialists. They hope the whole country just burns down. They, and if you talk about class struggle, you're a big racist, sexist, homophobe. I mean, it's this strange dynamic where they assume that the woke crowd is revolutionary. They assume that the people that are supporting Trump now could never support anything remotely socialistic. And they are under the illusion that American politics is still in that late Cold War normal. And it's not. It's not. Right? Donald Trump is not George W. Bush. If Donald Trump was just George W. Bush amped up on steroids, George W. Bush would be endorsing him right now. He's not. If Donald Trump were just George W. Bush on steroids, John Bolton would be endorsing him right now. He's not. Right? He's not. And some people say, well, this is further proof that Donald Trump is a fascist. Well, here's the thing, folks. Fascists and communists historically have recruited from the same milieu, the same neighborhoods, right? In Germany, there were a lot of people who were in fascist neighborhoods who were recruited to the Communist Party. There were a lot of people in the Communist Party that were recruited in fascist neighborhoods because fascists and communists tend to appeal to the same feeling of disgust with the status quo. The difference is, what do you do about it? Fascists organize a movement of mass destruction. Communists organize a movement of construction, of socialism, planned economy. Fascists want to beat people down and set up some kind of medieval hierarchy in order to maintain, in order to maintain capitalism and end social unrest. Communists, on the other hand, want to, have the banks, factories, and industries organized to serve the people and get profits out of command, right? They want a centrally planned economy. They want a socialist society. But they appeal to the same feelings, the same anger at the status quo, the same desire for some kind of revolution, the same desire for a powerful state that will stabilize things. Fascists and communists often appeal to the same feelings. The same feelings. They just offer different solutions. But that woke crowd will never admit that. Oh, no. Anyone who Donald Trump is appealing to right now, we don't want those people because they're authoritarian. They have authoritarian personalities, don't you know, right? They have authoritarian personalities. If you're the kind of person who would want a strong leader to come in and fix things in the U.S. economy, you're a Nazi and Donald Trump should keep you. What we want is teenage rebellion. What we want is people that are, I don't even want to tear down the left. People tear down the left too much. You know what I'm saying, okay? There's a certain personality that the left is okay with, and that personality will never make a revolution. And there's a certain personality that could support Trump, but if they really understood socialism, could be won to socialism. And, there's a reason, like I said, that there were many neighborhoods in Germany where the Communist Party and the Nazi Party recruited. They appeal to the same sentiments. They just offer very different solutions. Communist solution is to build and construct and build something better. Fascist solutions is an authoritarian state to beat people down, to reinforce a medieval hierarchy, and to try and carry out mass destruction in order to save the system. But, again, if you still live in this Cold War normal, where the working class, that working class majority is the most dangerous, the only people that you can recruit are this bohemian milieu of free-thinking whatevers, you're going to be left behind. Right? And that's what you folks need to understand here. That's why the RCP called on its supporters to vote for Joe Biden. That's why communist groups right now are tiny and insignificant, despite the fact that interest in Marxism and communism is everywhere in U.S. society right now. That's what's going on here. The late Cold War normal has got to be gotten rid of. That Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger political setup, right? The neocon formula, right? Irving Kristol, Leo Strauss, that formula for U.S. society doesn't exist anymore. Millions of people are open to populism and revolution, but the left is still stuck in anti-populism. That's the problem, folks. That is the problem. Folks, there's a reason that after the death of Lenin, Stalin put him in a mausoleum. There's a reason for that. Right? It's that the people of Russia needed someone to believe in. They needed an idol. They needed a figure who could be the symbol of their hopes and aspirations. Right? The cult of personality built around Lenin by Stalin was necessary because people need an ideology to believe in. They need something to fight for. They need something to feel bonded with other people around. They need a purpose in life. They need to be understanding who they are, where they're going. They need to be part of a project. Religion used to give people that purpose. Patriotism used to give people that purpose. But now all of that has been deconstructed, and rightly so. Rightly so. But we're now in a period where Donald Trump is trying to build a populist movement on the basis of people trying to keep the dream alive, make America great again, on the one hand. And then we have a left that says, don't believe in anything. Don't believe in anything. There is no truth. They tear down Confederate statues, rightly so, and don't replace them with anything because there is no truth. Think for yourself. There's no purpose. You wonder why so many people across the United States are suicidal. You wonder why so many people across the United States are killing themselves with opioids, right? It's because of the fact that they don't have a purpose. They don't have something to live for. They don't have something to believe in. And the left says, well, you don't need that. You can be a free-thinking intellectual. You don't want to be an authoritarian personality, do you? You can believe in whatever you want. Everything's a matter of opinion. There is no truth. There's no point in life. That's the left. The right wing says there is a point. America's great. And it's a mess. It's a mess. There's a reason that Stalin put Lenin in the mausoleum. There's a reason that the communist parties would march around with red flags and salute each other with fists and sing the Internationale. It was because of the fact that they were replacing the ideology of the old system with a new ideology to believe in, a new purpose in life, a new mission to be on, something new to fight for. But the new left says you can't do that. And that is our problem. Yes, all these things that middle America used to believe in have been deconstructed. They're reacting, they're scared, they're afraid, they're upset. And Donald Trump says, don't worry, I'll rally you around them. And the left says, oh, screw you, you're racist. They don't get it. They don't get it. That's our problem, folks. This is our problem, is we need to break with the late Cold War political model. And that's what I'm trying to do with Center for Political Innovation. I am trying to develop a constructive socialism to get us out of the crisis. That's what I'm trying to do. And, I want to defeat racism. I want to defeat imperialism. I want to defeat all the problems facing U.S. society. But we can't do it if the left continues to believe in postmodernism. We can't do it if the left continues to, to cling to anti-populism. That's where I'm at. And so I hope that that gives you all some perspective. Those are my opening remarks. So why don't we now do our roll call, where I call you out as I see you. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Let me call you out as I see you. Give me your names and locations. Australia. Elias from Wisconsin. Nihilism is a sickness. Dallas, Texas. Portugal. Daniel. Paradise, Ontario. Indiana. Istanbul. Germany. Radner. Michael. Los Angeles. Sam Levin. Hi from the Philippines. Jason from Arizona. Vancouver, Canada. Portland, Oregon. Hills from the Bronx. Springfield, Missouri. Marco from Sao Paulo, Ireland. Nick from Vancouver. Brian Schaefer in Illinois. JT24 Mississippi. Cringe Berkeley. Great videos. Caleb says Rig. Hello from Australia. Washington, D.C. Salem, Oregon. Long Island, Austria. Nevada. Georgia. Cincinnati, Ohio. PA. Townander, Michigan. Joe Gale, Nassau County. Jerry from Planet Earth. Hawaii. Pittsburgh. Richmond, Virginia. Dayton, Ohio. Majorie Williams. Michigan, Dillian, Delaware, Cleveland, Anthony Penza, Costa, Ontario, Dearborn, Michigan, Mohsen from Arab Iran, Ontario, Fairhope, Alabama, Vallejo, California, Belize, Missouri, Rock City, Greeley, Colorado, Montreal, Dog Sauce, Reno, Nevada, Belo Horizonte, Brazil, Minneapolis, Minaj, Springfield, Missouri, Bali, Indonesia, Mo in Pomona, California, Robert from Hawaii, Tony Soprano from New Jersey, Atlanta, Georgia, the Grassy Knoll, the California People's Republic, Auckland, New Zealand, Miami, Florida, Area 51, Kenny from Malaysia, Richie from Staten Island, Sorry Cats. Before he died, Michael Brooks' sister said he was privately concerned about cancel culture, ID poll, and the lack of spirituality on the left. Interesting. Very interesting. I did not know that. But that's interesting to me. It sounds like he shared some of my concerns. Harold Sullivan in South Florida. Glad you're with us, Harold. All right, folks. I am going to knock out these super chats. Eugene V. Debs. The person was suggesting writing in his name. Well, your vote won't get counted. If they're not an official write-in, they don't count them up. So just keep that in mind before you write in somebody. I know a lot of people do that. They go to the ballot and they write in their own name or something like that. Well, it doesn't get counted unless it's an official write-in candidate. So keep that in mind. But Eugene V. Debs is what we need during this time. I mean, we more than ever, we need someone like Eugene Debs, a populist, to go around and preach a socialist message and win average Americans to socialism, not try to be king of the protest cage, not win with this leftist milieu, but win on a socialist platform that average people could be convinced of to get us out of the crisis, a socialism that will be about improving their lives. The axis of resistance in the Middle East. Well, that's what Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah have been referring to themselves as. I think it's a response to George W. Bush calling them the axis of evil. I think around 2006 when Israel invaded Lebanon, 2006, 2007 when Israel invaded Lebanon, they started calling themselves the axis of resistance. That's where the name comes from, and they certainly are that. Libertarians in the gold standard. Yeah, I don't get it. I really don't get it. But libertarians, I think, it does not make any sense. The big libertarian, Milton Friedman, is a big advocate of monetarism and such, but this, fiat currency. But yeah, libertarians, I think they think that because we had a gold standard, everyone was rich because we had gold, and this happens, right? When there's a crisis, all the libertarians start buying up gold because they think that they'll have gold, and our money is just paper. We need gold. And then the thing is, the price of gold then goes up because there's more demand for it. So the whole thing is crazy, right? Even though it doesn't make any sense why that they want gold, it doesn't make any economic sense. I mean, a gold standard, right? A gold standard is just an economic policy. The populists, were advocating a silver standard. They were opposed to it. It was a bad economic policy, but regardless, libertarians are convinced, well, the problem is the gold standard. We need the gold standard. They can't explain why it's better. Get them to explain why the gold standard is better. They'll tell you something like, well, our money's just paper. And it's like, yeah, but what's the issue, right? Now, for a while, I know the Saudi monarchy was demanding to be paid in gold for its oil, which is kind of amusing. So, would you rate Xi Jinping out of 10? That's an interesting question. Rate Xi Jinping out of 10. Alrighty. All right. Bill Clinton, Kwame Ture. Yeah, I saw that dig Bill Clinton made at Kwame Ture. He made that dig in his campaign at the funeral of John Lewis. He said he felt like the movement was going way too much toward Kwame Ture's way, and it was very strange. I could listen to Kwame Ture for hours. I mean, he's just such a good speaker and a socialist, absolutely a socialist. He talks about socialism in every speech, every lecture. He was an admirer of Baath's socialism, African socialism. He called himself a scientific socialist. Kwame Ture, if you want to really hear some socialist agitating, some clear socialist rhetoric, someone explaining socialist politics in a very clear manner and a very charismatic way, check out the speeches of Kwame Ture. When I used to go to these things called gyms that used to be open before this pandemic, I would listen to Kwame Ture's lectures. Great stuff. Very, very good stuff. All gets back to socialism, too. He was a socialist. He was a black nationalist, a black liberation fighter, but he was a socialist. Kwame Ture, I could listen to him for hours. Someone asked me about the KMT post-World War II. Yeah, the KMT is the nationalist movement in China that was started by Dr. Sun Yat-sen before World War II. And originally the communists were part of it. It was a mass movement for three principles: independence, democracy, and the people's livelihood. However, Chiang Kai-shek came into power after the death of Sun Yat-sen, started executing communists. So then, the communists, started waging a war against the KMT. There was a civil war. There was briefly an alliance against Japan, and then there was a civil war again. The Chinese Communist Party was victorious. They created the People's Republic on the mainland, so the KMT set up shop in Taiwan. They called it the Republic of China. The People's Republic was on the mainland. The KMT maintained rule over the island of Taiwan. For a long time, the way the government was set up, the people living in Taiwan didn't really have any democratic rights because all of China was represented in the parliament. So because of that, all the people in Taiwan's votes would be overturned by KMT members who represented the whole Chinese mainland in the parliament. They had the White Terror campaigns where anyone who was a communist, not to join the military. Not to join the military. All right. Yeah, I mean, they had the White Terror campaigns. In the 70s and 80s, Taiwan started moving toward more of an open society. They do have, elections and stuff now. I think one can legally make pro-communist statements and stuff. Taiwan has changed a lot. And what's interesting is nowadays the KMT, oddly, is the more friendly to China of Taiwan, political parties. It's the party that's in power now, the Democratic Progressive Party, is the party that's very anti-China. Whereas the KMT actually has a relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. When China had its reform and opening up, the KMT, it's like one country but two different governments. Well, the DDP, has a different setup. The other party, they have more of the attitude that Taiwan is not part of China, and Taiwan is part of China. So, okay, alrighty. Center for Political Innovation, right? I'm glad you asked about it. And I'm glad you want to get involved. The problem is the pandemic, okay? The problem is that we can't be having public events right now because that's not permitted under health regulations. So we don't really have any public events. We're hoping to have an event in November in California if, at that point, restrictions are lifted so we could have an event. We've been having some Zoom calls and there's been discussion, but at the moment we're kind of frozen. We did publish a book. We published the Green Book by Gaddafi. We're on the brink of publishing our own edition of Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. We're hoping to have the launch conference next April, hoping that all restrictions will be lifted by that time. But at the moment, we're not really doing many public events, any public events really, because we can't. Because of the pandemic. So, but we want to do it, and it's difficult. How do you organize in this time when there's a lockdown and all of that? Well, I'm on here doing these lives, espousing my message and the message of CPI almost 2-3 times a week. Yeah, there you go. Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, was a black revolutionary activist from the 60s and 70s who changed his name to Kwame Ture, great socialist organizer and speaker. All right, I didn't follow the big protest in Germany, so I can't tell you about it. I can't give you any information about it because I just haven't followed it. Is Black Lives Matter Marxist? No, it's not. That doesn't mean that they are not legit. They definitely are legit, right? I mean, the fact that police murder African Americans and get away with it so frequently, yes, they have a legit message, and the issue that they're organizing around is 100% for real. Are they Marxist? I would not say so, because they don't really espouse class struggle. They tend to espouse a message that white privilege exists. They tend to espouse a message that racism exists, which it does. But they're not really putting forward a dialectical materialist understanding. They're not, someone says that BLM was founded by someone who called themselves a Marxist. Well, Marxists have been involved in anti-racist struggles, from the beginning. I mean, in the Civil War, you had Marxists who were involved. So, is it possible that Marxists have been hired to work at BLM because BLM is able to get big funding? Right? I mean, Black Lives Matter Incorporated, which was set up by Soros, I believe, right? It was just a hashtag, right? Around the time of Trayvon Martin's death, it was a hashtag on social media, BLM, Black Lives Matter. But then, it became Black Lives Matter Incorporated, which is a well-funded activist group that has ties to George Soros. Again, does that mean that they're legit? They're not legit, and that they're no. I'm just telling you that when you're a well-funded group, you get funding from somebody. I think the Ford Foundation also funds them, but that's not everyone who goes to a Black Lives Matter protest. That's one foundation group, and is it possible they've hired Marxists to work at it? I'm sure. And again, I mean, nowadays, a lot of people, everyone who goes to graduate school thinks they're a Marxist. I mean, and they're not. So. I mean, a lot of people, they read the Frankfurt School and they read Adorno and they think they're a Marxist. Well, they're not, right? I mean, that's not Marxism. But they think because, that they used Marx in their college thesis about, jazz music and, gender oppression or something, they think they're a Marxist. Well, you're not, right? A lot of academia, sociology, anthropology draws from Marxism. But Marxism is a worldview. It is a revolutionary perspective. And that deconstruction and that whole worldview is not Marxist in and of itself. Okay. All right. I'm not going to give Xi Jinping an out of 10 rating because, I mean, he's not been in power that long, so to speak, and there's a lot of things that are still in the works. I don't know how things are going to end. I will say that Fidel Castro gave a glowing endorsement to Xi Jinping before he died. I don't want to misquote him. Go and read what Fidel Castro said about Xi Jinping. John Oliver, anti-China hysteria, COVID, Bolsonaro COVID. All right, John Oliver. China, Bolsonaro, COVID. Alrighty. So yeah, Fidel Castro thought the world of Xi Jinping. So yeah, check it out. Alrighty. Why should you not join the U.S. military? Well, if you want me, and the question I think was, how would I convince a teenager not to join the U.S. military? Show them the movie Full Metal Jacket. Show them Full Metal Jacket. Show them the first half of the movie, Full Metal Jacket. Show them what boot camp is like. That might be a start. How else might you... Oh, someone's telling me I missed a super chat. What super chat did I miss? What was it? What did I miss? Oh, what was the super chat I missed? Do you feel like you were writing off gamer culture? All right, gamer culture and the proletariat. Gamer culture, proletariat. Alrighty. Okay. Okay. What else? What might you want to do? If you want to convince someone not to join the military, have them meet with an anti-war vet, right? Or have them meet with any former U.S. military person. I mean, you know, many people have been in the U.S. military and will tell you how awful it is. You know, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, the biggest unrecruiters of the military are vets themselves. You know, someone who's been, have them talk with someone who's been in Afghanistan, have them talk with someone who's been in Iraq. I mean, and there's a lot of them that aren't even political. I mean, I've worked with people who just, they're not political, they're right wing, maybe they even believe in the wars, but they'll just tell you no one gets more mistreated by the US government than soldiers do. You know, they send these soldiers off into very dangerous circumstances and take advantage of them, you know, test drugs on them, test, you know, chemicals on them. You know, I mean, you know, the majority, a number of the people that are homeless now in U.S. society are veterans, right? I mean, nobody gets more mistreated than rank and file soldiers. Yeah, for the brass, right? For the military brass, things are pretty good, but rank and file soldiers get very, very badly treated. You know, and PTSD, and yeah, I mean, yeah, I think, you know, that show them Full Metal Jacket, what they're going to go through in boot camp, and have them talk to some of the GIs. I mean, talk to some of these Vietnam vets, for goodness sakes. 'Cause I mean, I knew a number of Vietnam vets who came back and were protesters. I had the honor of working with some of them when I was an activist, and those guys will tell you what they saw and experienced in Vietnam and why they deeply regret the day they went into the military. A lot of them were drafted, and they still say they wouldn't have done it. They'd rather gone to prison. So, All Quiet on the Western Front is one of the greatest anti-war films ever made. Right? Well, it's a book too. It was a very popular book, and I read that book when I was in junior high. I think I read it, and then I saw the movie All Quiet on the Western Front. It's about World War I. Right? And it's really interesting because it makes you really wonder about Adolf Hitler. Because, I mean, World War I, it was just a horrendous war. You read All Quiet on the Western Front, it describes the conditions that people fought, you know, under World War I. It was just awful. I mean, it's awful. But yet, you know, when you read Mein Kampf by Hitler, he describes World War I like it was the most glorious experience of his life. It was amazing. He felt like he was a knight in a castle or something. And you can tell that, you know, when people get PTSD, often they'll split. They'll remember the same event 3 different ways. You know, and it's like, you know, Hitler was blinded during World War I. But yet, if you read his Mein Kampf, he talks about World War I like it was so glorious. And anyone who's read All Quiet on the Western Front or read what American GIs went through in World War I mean, people who were in that trench warfare in World War I will describe it as just awful, awful. But yet, there you go. Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo is a very good book as well. So yeah. Alrighty. John Oliver's anti-China and Bolsonaro getting COVID. Well, I mean, as far as John Oliver, I mean, I didn't watch his latest anti-China piece. I did watch his piece on conspiracy theories, and I was blown away. I was just utterly blown away by his piece on conspiracy theories because, I mean, it's just standard, you know, conspiracy theories are bad. Trump is bad because he promotes them. Scientism, believe, you know, what the fact checkers always say. There is no such thing as a conspiracy theory. Everything's up front. You know, it's just your standard defense of the status quo. But what shocked me was in the piece, he's making the argument that conspiracy theories are no good. And he makes an argument that does not even make any sense. And then to back it up, he said something patently false. So he's making the argument that conspiracy theories are no good. And he says, for example, There are all kinds of, there are conspiracy theories about big events and not small events. I'm thinking, yes, because there's more speculation about big events than small events. What's your point? That doesn't mean anything, right? Like, there's more news reporting on big events. There's more reaction to big events, right? So, of course, there's going to be more conspiracy theories about big events than little events. So then, to prove his point, he says, for example, there are all kinds of conspiracy theories about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, but there are almost no conspiracy theories about the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981. And I saw that and I said, okay, first of all, that doesn't even mean anything. Second of all, there are all kinds of conspiracy theories about the assassination of the assassination attempt against Ronald Reagan in 1981. Good night, John Hinckley, the Bush family, Catcher in the Rye. For years, have you ever read the works of Jose Carlos? No, I have not. I have not read those works, but thank you. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories, about the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981. I'm uploading a lot more recently. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing my best. All kinds of conspiracy theories about the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981. So for him to say there's almost none, that's ridiculous. I was just sitting there going, did he just say that? Did he just say that? Did he really say that? Couldn't believe it. Alrighty. As far as Bolsonaro having COVID, Bolsonaro, that guy has fallen on his face. You want to talk about an incompetent leader? You think Trump is doing a bad job? Trump is definitely doing a bad job with this pandemic, with the economy. Bolsonaro is doing a really bad job. Bolsonaro should be out on his butt. The people of Brazil should get him out of there, get Lula da Silva back in there, in my opinion. He's an illegitimate leader. He had to railroad his opponent into jail just so he could win the election. He lies, he downplays, COVID. I can't think of a worse world leader at this time than Bolsonaro. That guy is a failed leader. He's a failed president. All right, gamer culture and the proletariat. That's true. Maybe I should know more about gamer culture. Maybe that would put me in touch with more proletarian young men. It's a flaw I have. I can't do everything, folks. And you're right. I don't disagree with you. It's important to know about these things. It's important to understand these things. It's important to be able to engage with people from different backgrounds. And yeah, it's a weakness that I have. To be fair, I've debated Destiny. He's a big deal in gamer culture. I've debated Vosh. He's a big deal in gamer culture. So, I may not know video games, but I've encountered and dealt with people in that world. And I don't think that world should not be engaged with. I don't dismiss it. I don't write it off. I just don't play video games. So, there you go. And I'm not against playing video games. I just don't personally do it. Someone said, think my chat is behind. Well, there you go. Alrighty. Are there any more super chats? Anyone want to say anything else before we wrap this up here? Anything else that people want to say? Speak now or forever hold your peace. I did not mean for this to be a long live. This is just kind of a quick one because I had something to say. Anything else on people's minds? Speak now or forever hold your peace. If not, it's hot. My air conditioner's broken. I have to go buy a new one. So that's frustrating. We're starting to have a little bit of the hurricane outside. What? Oh, whoa. Thoughts on... Whoa, 2 went by really fast. Valerie Sabin, who I don't know who that is, but there was... What author inspired me the most or something? What was that super chat? Oh, China, relation to the Philippines. All right. China, Philippines. What was the question about authors? What was the question about authors? I got China, Philippines. I got Valerie somebody. I don't know who that is. But then what was the question about authors? What authors changed your views? Authors changed my views. Inspired you the most and changed your views. Views inspired me. Okay. All right. So on China-Philippine relations, the the Philippines was a U.S. territory. I mean, it was colonized by the United States. After World War II, it got its independence. For many decades, it had a dictator who was imposed by the United States, brutally repressed the people there. There was a whole uprising against him. There's a whole history of communists in the Philippines fighting against the United States, the U.S.-backed dictatorship. In the 80s, that dictatorship fell, but there continued to be an insurgency against the dictatorship. There's several islands that are under the control of some communist groups that are there, and there's a big base among the population of people that admire communism and such. But the government of the Philippines, for a long time, has just basically been a puppet of the United States, right? The Marcos dictatorship fell, and they got various leaders that were elected, but they were puppets of the United States. But then, this latest election, we have, the rise of Duterte. And Duterte is a Bonapartist. And he represents a level of independence on the part of the Philippine ruling class. They're saying basically, yeah, the USA has been kind of mistreating us for a while. We're going to be a little more independent. And at the beginning, it looked like Duterte, to be fair, it looked like he might be, almost like a Hugo Chavez figure. Republican and free markets guy, but I have seen the stress. However, how can I be where communism was not the best ideal? Thoughts, okay. Not the best ideal. Duterte represented the Philippine capitalist class becoming a little more independent. And at the beginning, he appointed a member of the Communist Party, the illegal Communist Party, to be like an environmental minister. He was going to negotiate and kind of end the civil war with the communists, rebels. And he's a personal friend of one of the communist leaders, actually. He studied philosophy at the university, I believe, with Joma Sasan, who was a leader who's he's in exile in the Netherlands, but he's like the leader of and so there was many people were hoping that Duterte would be kind of a Hugo Chavez figure, that he'd be, he'd take office on kind of a moderate platform, but be aligned with the communists and maybe move the country towards socialism. That didn't happen. There was, martial law was declared. There was some big crackdowns on drug dealers, and he's not going to be a socialist. He's not a progressive Bonapartist. He represents more independence, and he seems to have made an agreement with China when it comes to the South China Sea, right? And he's not going, I'm not trying to do a deep dive, but I'm looking at solutions either side. What do you think a hybrid of the two would work? I'll address that. Hybrid of the two. So basically, he's settled. He's not going to have the Philippines be a proxy for the United States to fight China, right? He's not going to let the United States and China go at it in the South China Sea. He's going to be independent, right? That's pretty clear. But aside from that, he's fighting the communists. He's waging martial law. He's a lot like Erdogan in Turkey. He's a lot like Modi in India, is that he is a more independent leader. He's a bourgeois nationalist. He represents the bourgeoisie of India or of the Turkey or of the Philippines, asserting their independence. And right now, Russia and China are rising in the world. And so there's a lot of countries where the ruling class is saying, hey, maybe China can give us a better deal. Maybe Russia can give us a better deal. Maybe America can give us a better deal. We're going to do what's in our own interest. Who says we have to just work for the Americans? Who says that, right? Well, maybe we'll work with the Americans if they give us what we want, or maybe we'll work with the Russians and Chinese if they give us what I want. That's what Duterte is. And many hoped he would be better than that. Wasn't so much, right? And that's who he is. And China China very much needs the South China Sea to be secure because their oil tankers come through the South China Sea. China is dependent on foreign oil. And so because of that, having Duterte, somebody who's a little more friendly to them in the South China Sea and in the Philippines, is in China's interest. That makes sense, right? That's basically the situation there, is that China needs that oil to keep coming. And they see the United States messing with them and militarizing and expanding its military presence in the South China Sea, which is a threat because at any point, if the United States were to cut off China's oil supply, the lights would go out on the mainland. It would bring China's economy to a grinding halt. So in order to make sure their oil tankers keep coming in through the South China Sea, keep coming into the ports of Shanghai, they basically have got a friend. They've got a friend in the Philippines who is a little more friendly to them. He's not a communist. He's not, a puppet of the Chinese by any means. But Duterte will make a deal with them, and that's that. All right, so why don't I answer these two questions from our Republican friend, first of all, before I answer the author's thing. So this person says they're a Republican and a conservative, but they think communism is not the best ideal. And what do I say to that? And then they followed up with, would a hybrid of the two work? Well, here's the thing. First of all, we have to be clear what socialism and communism are. There's a lot of confusion about that. I was taught in school when I was growing up that communism means everyone gets paid the exact same wage no matter how hard they work. And of course, and that would be awful. I remember my teacher saying, well, communism would be if everyone in this class got the exact same grade. Well, that's not what it is, right? We have to be very clear, right? Socialism is a system in which the banks, factories, and major industries operate according to public need and not the profit of individual owners. Socialism is where the factories and the big box stores and the oil wells operate in a way that serves public good and not profits. That's socialism. That is the first stage. Communism is the ideal. Communism is a world in which so much abundance has been created and technology has advanced so much that there really isn't a need for coercion, right? That poverty is eliminated, that there is just so much abundance, so little human labor is necessary, that basically human beings just kind of live in peace with each other, and there's no need to regulate anything, and it all fades away. Communism, you're asking about the ideal, right? The ideal, the final stage, the highest stage of communism. Yes, it's very far off, but it's a very good ideal. I mean, would you be opposed to a world where everyone had so much stuff and so little human work was required that people didn't really need to do and they could just kind of do what they felt like doing? That would be an ideal state of being. I think that's a very good ideal. But it's far off. I'd say it's hundreds, if not thousands of years away. Socialism, a system where the banks, factories, and industries and major centers of economic power are organized to serve the people and don't simply operate based on whatever's profitable for those who own them. Socialism is a way of getting toward that ultimate goal. Now, you raised the question, would a hybrid of the two work? And that's interesting because, in a way, you're kind of getting at something that I would agree with. But at the same time, you're kind of not understanding, right? Socialism is not just government ownership, right? If that were the case, Saudi Arabia would be socialist because they have a huge rate of government ownership. If that were the case, after World War II, Britain would have been socialist because there was a huge rate of government ownership. No, socialism is a matter of where and why production is organized. Is production organized in order to make a profit, or is production organized to serve the public? What we've learned during the Cold War is that it's necessary in some fields. It's absolutely necessary to have market forces. The government can't be running hotels. The government can't be running restaurants. The government can't be running, children's toys. It can't be designing, clothing, consumer goods, things that make life shiny and exciting. You need a market sector to do that. Now, I would favor some kind of worker cooperative situation where everyone at the company shared in the profits, not just some getting paid wages while others make profits. But even that, you might even need just regular private companies. It's still a socialist society if banking is in the hands of the people. It's still a socialist society if there's a 5-year plan. It's still a socialist society if major industries are operated by the state and forced to work in the interest of public good. In the past, I have laid out 4 steps that would make the United States a socialist country, and they go like this. The first step would be to put under public back up. The first step would be a mass campaign to reconstruct the country, right? A mass mobilization to build new highways and bridges, to build high-speed railway, to rebuild our universities, to rebuild our water systems, to rebuild our power plants, just a mass construction project to rebuild the United States of America. That would be the first step. The second step would be taking under public ownership all natural resources, oil, gas, coal, timber, all things that are basically, from the earth, should be the property of all Americans. And the profits made from America's timber, America's gas, America's coal, America's oil should go into the public budget, not into the hands of a private capitalist. We should have public ownership of our natural resources. The third step would be public control of the lending of money, right? The lending of money should be done, in the interest of society overall, not in the interest of what a private lender thinks they can make a profit from, right? Make the state the monopolist on lending. Also abolish the Federal Reserve, have the government print our currency, have the government do the lending of money with a national bank. That would be step 3. And step 4 would be then, with our national bank, with our publicly owned natural resources, with our newly reconstructed country, at that point, to guarantee all Americans a job, housing, education, etc. That's socialism. If we did those things, at that point, yes, there would be private stores, there'd be private restaurants, there'd be private businesses, there'd be private clothing lines, there'd be private, tech companies making new apps, etc. But the major centers of economic power would be controlled by the state. And the economy would be guided by a state central plan that would force it to work in the interests of society overall. And that would be socialism. When the economy is organized to serve public good and not profits, that's socialism. When the banks, factories, and industries are forced by society to serve the people, that's socialism. When profits are in command, that's capitalism. Capitalism is profits in command. Capitalism is the rule of the dollar. Frederick Engels said capitalism is a system in which, what did he say? He said, under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Mao said capitalism is profits in command. That's what capitalism is. Socialism is the negation of that. It's when profits are not in command. It's when human reason and rational planning can control the economy and you don't have the chaos of the market or the anarchy of production. That is socialism. And China is a socialist country. Vietnam is a socialist country. Cuba is a socialist country. They call their system in Vietnam the socialist-oriented market economy. Why? Because they have a big market. All right, YPG made a big deal with U.S. oil company. Okay, YPG, Rajava Oil. All right, we'll address that. There's a room, you need some market sector in a socialist economy, but profits cannot be in command. I've often said that the slogan that will bring socialism to the United States is, we need a government of action to fight for working families. This notion in the United States that the government is best, that governs least, that, hey, just let the market take care of itself, it's not working. We need a government of action, a powerful government to step in and force the economy to work in the interest of the people. We need state power. We need a government of action to take action to fight for America's working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. That's what we need. If we can get those 11 words everywhere, we need a government of action to fight for working families. That's what we need right now. And that's why I think any Republican right now, any conservative who loves their country, who loves working class communities and sees how greed is destroying them, and sees that big corporations who have no loyalty to the country, no loyalty to the community, no loyalty to anything but their profits, are looting the country. We've got roads being unpaved. We've got water not being properly purified. We've got wars going on around the world that don't benefit the American people in any conceivable way. They just make profits for the military-industrial complex. They keep the world safe for ExxonMobil and the big bankers. But instead, if we had a government that fought for the people and forced the big corporations, forced them to do what was in the interest of the country overall, took under major public ownership the values of the country, controlled the lending of money. If we had a state that didn't draw its power from rich and powerful people backing it up, but instead from a well-organized network of people in communities, a mass movement of people fighting for their rights and fighting and taking history into their hands and organizing in communities. And that's where the state drew its power. And it used that power to control the corporations and force them to work in the interest of society overall. That would be socialism. And it would be unique. It wouldn't be like any other form of socialism. How do we inject populism into communist organizing? Becoming consensus. Thank you. You're a Nazbol. Yeah, okay. Populism. Alrighty. All right, so I got a few more super chats here. So I was asked about the authors and views that inspired me. Well, I mean, one of the books that influenced me the most was William Z. Foster's book, Toward Soviet America. I read that when I was 15. I loved it. It was the most down-to-earth, clear Marxist message I'd ever read. I really like Anna Louise Strong, the American journalist who went to the Soviet Union. She wrote about life in the Soviet Union. She wrote the Stalin era. She wrote I Change Worlds. Anna Louise Strong, an amazing writer. I like Edgar Snow. I really got into his writing about China at one point. That was really influential on me, no doubt. What else? I read some of the basics, the Communist Manifesto, etc. I will say that I've learned the most. The book that taught me the most about Marxism was The History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster. And I learned, folks, it's a mistake to go and read the Lenin or the Marx first. It's a mistake. I tried to do that, and I did it. I mean, I forced myself. I got through Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. I read that book. It's a very important book. I got through The State and Revolution by Lenin. But I got to tell you that the textbooks, The History of the Three Internationals, there's a good book called The Foundations of Marxism-Leninism that was published in the USSR. These books are more helpful because the books are polemics. They are arguments, right? They're arguments with other socialists, and taken out of context 100 years later, they're very hard to dissect. What is to be done is Lenin's book about how to make a revolution, basically, and how a revolutionary communist group should operate. Very difficult to get through. It's important to read it, but it's very difficult to get through. But if you read one of these textbooks, you read History of the Three Internationals, you read Introduction to Marxism-Leninism, that stuff lays it all out on the table very clearly. Then go and study the actual texts. Most people make the mistake of reading the complicated stuff first, and then they just shut it and never open it again. I would urge you to read the textbooks first. Read Soviet textbooks. Read Marxist textbooks. That's where you get a real understanding of these ideas. They make a lot more sense when you do that. That's my advice there. But there's a lot of books that have influenced me. I read a lot of memoirs of communists, of their memories of what it was like to be a communist organizer. I read the Teamster series by Farrell Dobbs. I've read all kinds of stuff. I read Trotsky, even though I'm against Trotskyism. I studied Trotsky's writings. I studied the Stalin-Trotsky debate. I read Stalin's speeches opposing Trotsky. What else? Anything by William Z. Foster, I recommend. William Z. Foster is probably the greatest American Marxist writer. There's a lot of good stuff out there, a lot of very good stuff, but you have to dig, right? When you go to the library, and you get books on communism, you'll find so many books that are like post-Marxist. Governance of China by Xi Jinping is pretty good. Foundations of Leninism by Stalin. There's a lot of really good stuff out there that I would recommend. And you should read my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. That's my attempt to answer things. And I'm working on this very important book, The Synthetic Left, which is in the works. Alrighty. YPG making a deal with American oil, and yeah, I mean, as far as that goes, um, you know, I mean, folks, I'm not going to say bourgeois science and proletarian science. Oh God. Folks, I'm not going to say that the Kurdish people don't have the right to, a nation. I'm not going to say that that there aren't people in the YPG who really love Kurdish people, really believe in socialism and all of that. At this point, the YPG, they've been armed by the CIA. They've been collaborating with the United States. I obviously don't approve of that. They've been trying to overthrow the Syrian government. But I still Fidel Castro at one point got support from the U.S. government. Pretty soon he changed his position. Prison reform. Oh, okay. And just because people are collaborating at one point, let's remember China in the 70s was collaborating with the United States in a lot of different places. So, social people that are good sometimes make bad decisions, okay? I'm not willing to denounce the YPG 100%. I'm going to say I don't approve of what they're doing right now, and I think they're playing a negative role in Syria right now. But that said, that doesn't mean, Belarus, right? I think that Lukashenko has played a very good role in Belarus's history. Right now, he's in an anti-Russian mode. He's aligning with the U.S. imperialists against Russia, and I'm disappointed by that. That doesn't mean he hasn't done good things. But yeah, I mean, the YPG, what I will say, and I have said this before and I will say it again, right? It's one thing to recognize that the YPG probably has good people in it with good intent, but these American synthetic leftists, these clowns, who don't support any anti-imperialist country, don't support Cuba. Oh, it violates human rights. Thank you for your response. I need to dig deeper. You have a Republican fan out there. Well, thank you, Mr. Humphrey. I appreciate it. But, I mean, these synthetic leftists, right? They don't support Cuba, right? Oh, Cuba's a dictatorship, violates human rights. They don't support Vietnam. Oh, that's not socialist, violates human rights. They don't support China. Oh, it's this. Any socialist society, they denounce. But the one socialist society, the one group in the world that they can support is one that's armed by the CIA. I mean, do these people have any anti-imperialist bones in their body? I mean, I'm sorry. How do these people look themselves in the mirror? Well, I hate all socialists except for the ones armed by the CIA. That's normal, right? Could you go over the 1956? Wow, I'm just getting all kinds of things. All right, 1956 Hungarian Revolution. All righty. I mean, how do these people look themselves in the mirror? I don't know how they do it. I mean, they think they're anti-imperialist, but the only revolutionary movement that they're not, chicken shit scared of supporting. CIA meddling a lot in Taiwan in the 50s. Of course it was. I mean, especially, yeah. But yeah, the only anti-imperialist group that they have the courage to support is one that's armed by the CIA. And these people think they're anti-imperialist. I mean, they're clowns. They're clowns at best, okay? It's one thing to not denounce them, which I'm not denouncing them, and that to recognize that they have legit the courage to face discrimination. I'm not ready to just straight up, denounce them, which some people have. But if that's the only people that you have the courage to support, you are not an anti-imperialist. You're a punk. You're a punk, okay? Imperialism, the rule of the world by big banks and corporations, that is the main danger. Imperialism isn't like a special oppression. I'm sorry. These people, they I swear, these people, they think that imperialism is like, well, I'm against racism, I'm against sexism, I'm against fat phobia, I'm against transphobia, I'm against discrimination against vegans, I'm against, discrimination against cigarette smokers, and yeah, I'm against imperialism too, right? I mean, no. Like, imperialism is the world order we live under. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. It's not a verb, it's a noun. Imperialism is not a policy, it's a system. Imperialism, the rule of the world by big banks and corporations, Wall Street monopolists, That that is the main enemy of humanity, right? And it's destroying the lives of American working people, it's destroying the lives of people all over the world. And if you look at people that oppose it and go, oh yeah, I read in the New York Times that they're like no good, so, but then there's a group of people that are being supported by imperialism, and you're like, well, they wave the right flags, and they said my favorite lefty buzzwords, so I support them. You're a punk. You're a punk. You're a punk. Okay. All right. We're going to knock these out in different orders here. Okay. Bourgeois science and proletarian science. Well, science is science. There is a scientific method. Okay. Science is the struggle for truth. Now, people can have bias, right? There's bourgeois bias in science. There's Marxist bias in science, right? People have biases, but science is science. There's no difference between bourgeois science and proletarian science, right? Truth is truth. Science is science. Objective reality exists. Okay. Yeah. That's it. That's all there is to it. You know what I'm saying? I don't buy the idea that there's different science for different classes. I think that there are biases. Often there's a bourgeois bias in science. Especially during the Cold War, a lot of times scientists, they said they saw what they wanted, according to trying to fit an ideological narrative, trying to prove capitalism believed in trying to prove capitalism believed in, or that nature believed in capitalism or nature believed in socialism. Well, that's wrong, but it's not science, right? Science is the scientific method, objective reality, struggle for truth. So, yeah, that's all there is to that. Okay, prison reform. I am 100% in favor of prison reform. And again, ideally, we want a world where prisons are not necessary, right? Where there's the social ills that give rise to people becoming criminal or violent or whatever go away. I don't think, first of all, people shouldn't be in jail for using drugs, right? They should get drug treatment, for goodness sakes, right? And the prison system itself, the aim should be rehabilitation, ideally, we should aim for a world where that kind of punishment isn't necessary. Right? Now, obviously, we don't live in such a world. It's going to be a long time. I think it's kind of sad when people talk about being prison abolitionists. Again, that's not something most people can understand, right? To most people, you say, oh, I'm a prison abolitionist. And they say, wait a second. So you want to just let them all out, right? All the rapists and axe murderers and child molesters, just let them all out. Well, people are going to look at you like you're crazy. What people who are prison abolitionists mean is they want to get to a society where prisons are no longer necessary. And they're right. That should be the goal in the long term. But it's not something you can just declare immediately. We need a better way of communicating these things. We need to understand that, yes, the prison system as it exists, prisons for profit, is horrendous, right? And the fact that our economy relies on mass incarceration, the fact that our jails are full of people who shouldn't be there, the fact that there's an incentive to lock people up so corporations can make money, this has got to be gotten rid of, right? It's not healthy, the way the prison system in the United States works. But we need to figure out a better way to communicate it. The phrase prison abolition doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But that one thing that scares me is I feel like there's a normalization of mass incarceration going on. Every TV program you watch now, somebody goes to jail. I'm serious. It's a sitcom. It's, a family drama. There's always somebody going to jail. And they're trying to get it into our minds. People going to jail, it just kind of happens. No, it doesn't happen. What people endure in the prison system is horrendous, right? The strip searches, the loss of personal liberty. I've never been incarcerated, and thank goodness. But, what people, I've talked with people who have, it is a horrendous experience. It's not normal. It's not something we should just accept, right? And it scares me, the normalization of it. And honestly, it reminds me of Nazi Germany. In Nazi Germany, the way that they controlled the public is they had a huge number of people in prison camps all the time. And there was a normalization of it. Well, there shouldn't be a normalization of it. It's not normal to have people locked up. Societies have prisons, right? And it happens, but it should be the exception, not the rule. It shouldn't just be a part of life that we accept. It scares me. There's apparently in Nazi Germany, right? In Nazi Germany, this was a popular joke. In Nazi Germany, the joke is that, two guys are in a bar. There's this guy in a bar one day. A friend of his walks into the bar. He sees him. He says, hey, you're my friend. Yeah. Hey, whatever happened? It's been so long. I heard you went to a prison camp. And everything okay? You're out of the prison camp now? And the friend says, oh, yeah. I was in the prison camp, but I'm out now. And he says to him, wow. He says, well, what was the prison camp like? And the friend says, oh, it was amazing. It was so relaxing. Got to go hunting and fishing and water skiing. It was amazing. And the other friend says to him, well, that's weird. He said, my other friend Joe, he went to a prison camp. He told me it was awful and that they barely got any food and that they were being worked long hours and being beaten by guards. And it was just a horrendous experience, and that it was awful, and that he was traumatized for life by going to this horrendous prison camp. And it was just the worst thing he'd ever experienced. And the friend says, well, your other friend, he was totally lying. You know why? Because he just went back. That's not funny. That's not funny at all. That's like a scary, edgy joke. But apparently in Nazi Germany, people told each other jokes like that because it was like normalized. It was just part of everyday life, right? From the time Hitler took power in 1933 up until World War II, and even throughout World War II, it was just kind of normal. People go to prison camps. It just happens. Right? Hey, people go to these prison camps and get tortured and face horrendous realities and work long hours, and it's just this thing that happens in our society every so often. People go to prison camps. Not a big deal. Just deal with it. Well, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's not good. It is not good at all, right? And the fact that they're normalizing mass incarceration, I swear, every program I watch, every TV program, everything. Oh, somebody went to prison. Oh, but he's out now. It's all okay. No, it's not okay. Look at the prison system in the United States. Not okay. Right? I hope that no one in your family ever has to go through that. I hope that no one you know ever has to go through that. The prison system in the United States is not just a fact of life. It's not just this thing happened, right? Well, he must have been joking. He went back. No. Right? And, that's what I want to say about that, about prison reform and all of that. We have this dangerous normalization of mass incarceration right now. Alrighty, next question. Populism. And then, people think whatever they want about me. The main thing we need to do is we need to get out of the movement and get to the masses. Get out of the movement and get to the masses. That is a necessity right now. We need to get to the masses. And that, people are going to talk the way they talk about me. To be fair, right? I get mad at people that criticize what I say. To be fair, I probably, to some of these people who think they're socialists and communists right now, and all they've ever heard is socialism means, worker cooperatives, and socialism means that no one's allowed to mansplain except on Tuesdays if there's a full moon. When they hear me talking, when they hear the politics of William Z. Foster and Gus Hall and Eugene Debs and the politics of the Black Panther Party and Huey Newton, the politics of Marx and Lenin, the politics of Venezuela, it sounds like something from another planet to them. They go, what? Workers' revolution? Centrally planned economy? What? Dictatorship of the proletariat? Workers, it doesn't sound, I swear, if you go to a university and you have your socialist professor who teaches you gender studies and queer studies, and you hear them talk, and then you see me, it sounds like something from another planet, right? And that's because our politics, leftism, socialism, and Marxism, has been so watered down and distorted and confused that people don't even know what they're looking at. They go, huh? So, to be fair, until people, Mao Zedong said, until the way to really experience a pear is to bite into it. Well, until people bite into me, they're not going to get it, right? This is a unique brand we have on here. This is not what people are used to. So, and as long as people are saying, well, I heard or whatever, they're going to say that, right? And we're not aiming for them. We're not trying to recruit the left. We're not trying to recruit the people that are in the RCP and the ISO and the QWH and the XYZ. We're not trying to recruit them. We're trying to get to the masses of American people with a program that could get us out of this crisis. That's what we want. right? We're not playing the left game. We're trying to get to the masses. So if we try to accommodate these people's weirdness, we're going to fail. And as we do our thing, good people will come to us. And good people keep coming to me. I have met more good people in the last 2-3 weeks when people have been attacking me than I've met in years. People keep coming out of the woodwork. Wow, I heard about so-and-so was attacking you, and I looked into your stuff, and I actually really like what you said, Caleb, and I want to be involved. I have gotten about 17 of those emails in the last 2 weeks. I am not joking. And that's why it's so frustrating we can't have a public event, because it would be packed. I'm blowing up right now. I mean, our audience is vastly expanding because there's a lot of people that are looking for this. Just telling you the truth, folks. There's a lot of people that are looking for exactly what we're selling. So, we just got to keep doing what we're doing. We're not aiming for them. We're not trying to be king of the protest cage. We're not trying to be the coolest guy on Left Book. We're trying to get shit done. We're trying to get to the masses. And it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy. And we need fanatics, right? We need people that are willing to give their lives to all of this, right? When you have a heart attack and you're being rushed to the hospital, you really hope that the person who performs surgery on you to save your life is a fanatical doctor. Nobody, while they're being rushed to the hospital after they've had a heart attack, is saying, be sure that the doctor who treats me got mediocre grades in medical school. Don't give me some nerd who got straight A's. No. Make sure he's a normal guy who can have beer. I don't want a fanatic to operate on my heart. Nobody says that. Nobody says that. When you're in an emergency situation and you need aid, you need help to get out of that crisis, you want a fanatic, an extremist, somebody who has given the whole of their lives, who believes in what they're doing to solve the problem. That's what you want. But until that situation, you don't. Well, the way socialism will come to America is that the crisis will become so intense and things will get so bad that it will be like the country is rushing to the hospital after a heart attack. And at that moment, they are going to want a group of fanatics. A group of fanatics who know what they are doing, who have experience knowing what they're doing, to step in and liquidate the crisis. That's what they're going to want. And we are going to need a group of people that are not only fanatics, but they're so fanatical that they're willing to do this for real. Right? These groups that burn the American flag or on the internet accusing everybody else, they're not fanatical. They're just trying to make themselves feel good. But a fanatic is somebody who's so dedicated to this, so serious about this, so willing to tear this system down that they find a way to make it really work. They found a way to get out of the protest cage, get to the masses, out of the movement to the masses. They build organizations, they feed people, they build a community around socialism where they're providing for people, they're giving people housing, they're giving people health care and education, they're providing for people, they're caring for whole neighborhoods, and they're giving people ideological education. People doing like what Fred Hampton did with his free breakfast program in Chicago, where he was giving kids free breakfast, and thousands of kids were getting free breakfast from Fred Hampton. And while they were eating that breakfast, they were learning about capitalism and imperialism and Mao and the Red Book. And they were a community of people in need were getting taken care of while being ideologically trained. That's what communists do around the world. That's what they do, right? You go to Venezuela, you go to Latin America, you go to Africa, you go to Asia. That's what communists do, is they build a community around themselves. They are at the center. They're at the center of an axis in society. That's what they do. And a real fanatic, someone who's really fanatical, who really believes in this, will figure out how to get out of the protest cage, and get out of this funk called the movement, and get to the masses. Alrighty. So that answers the populism question. 1956 Hungarian Revolt. 1956 Hungarian Revolt. Well, the Soviet Union made some mistakes in Hungary in the way they operated that caused some resentment among the population. That's pretty clear. And people like Cardinal Vincenti and others were able to take advantage of the situation, and they took advantage of the situation, and they created a political crisis. And they were lynching members of the Communist Party and destroying symbols of communism. And some of the workers involved were communists who were confused, but the leaders of it were fascists and CIA-linked anti-communists. And in fact, the fascist Holocaust denier David Irving is a big supporter of the Hungarian counter-revolution in 1956. One of his books is all about the Hungarian, how great the Hungarian uprising was. I used to live in Cleveland. Cleveland has a lot of Hungarians in it. Go to a Hungarian. If you think that the 1956 Hungarian uprising wasn't about restoring capitalism, was about bringing true socialism to Hungary, go to a bar. Go to a Hungarian bar in Cleveland. Look for some older Hungarian guys. Say, hey, you're a real communist, not like those Soviet sellouts. You're a Trotskyite. You're an anarcho-communist, right? And see how quickly they punch you in the face. You're calling me a communist? I ain't no communist. I hate communism. That's what they're going to tell you. Right? Where can we read more about it? Herbert Apotheker wrote a great book about Hungary, The Truth About Hungary. There's all kinds of great stuff written about it. But yeah, the Hungarian Revolution, there were definitely some confused socialists involved, but the overwhelming majority of the forces involved in the Hungarian Revolution were seeking to restore capitalism and working with the CIA. And fascist, right? There were like fascist collaborators like Cardinal Vincenti who were involved. And it became very clear that it was about restoring capitalism. So the Soviet Union intervened. Now, I believe that the Soviet Union made mistakes that kind of set the stage for that to happen. It would never have gotten that out of control if the Soviet Union had not made those big mistakes, okay? And I'm sure that atrocities were committed when the Soviet Union intervened in 1956. They did things that, they shouldn't have done. And that happens. When you have, wars, there are two sides. But at the end of the day, the Hungarian events of 1956 were not about trying to build socialism. They were trying to overturn socialism. What's interesting is Mao sent people to meet with, this is fascinating, the Chinese Communist Party didn't know what side to be on in Hungary. So they sent their members to go and meet with the Hungarian revolutionaries. After meeting with them, determined that these Hungarian revolutionaries were anti-communist. So they went back to China and told Mao, yeah, these Hungarian revolutionaries are counter-revolutionaries. So Mao actually sent military forces to Hungary to join with the Soviets to put down the 1956 events. And what's fascinating is that was the first time that Asian political forces and Asian military forces intervened in Europe since the time of Genghis Khan. And that was actually a big moment in China's history, because for the first time, Chinese military forces intervened in Europe, not the other way around. European military forces were in China over and over and over again. But in 1956, for the first time, the Chinese military was intervening in Europe. It was a big moment. It's fascinating, actually. Right, and Mao gave them their chance. Tito, of course, supported the counter-revolution in Hungary, but Mao was open to it. Mao was friendly with Tito, and he wasn't quite sure. He liked Stalin, and Khrushchev was after Stalin, so he wasn't sure. So he actually met with the Hungarian, not himself, but Chinese communists, met with the Hungarian revolutionaries, figured out they were counter-revolutionaries, and they were on the other side. Interesting story. All right, folks, I think this is where we end for tonight. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Let me start at the beginning, because I skipped a line. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. And thank you, Marco. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Don't forget that slogan, folks. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Thank you.